Discover over 100 episodes of Bartholomewtown on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is the Bartholomewtown Podcast.
It was very clear if someone did any kind of research on you, whether you sold it to them at the door, but where you stood in world politics. I think that's great. That you were able to do that and still win. It's authenticity.
I mean, you search my name in Google, and it's me speaking at rallies, climate rallies and stuff. So and this is something that I've gotten a lot of pushback that climate change is not a local issue, and it's so far from the truth.
Welcome in to another edition of the Bartholomewtown Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Bartholomew. On today's episode, I sit down with Woonsocket City Councilor Alex Kithes. Always a pleasure to spend time together here on the pod, dropping this episode on a day of international action on climate change, expecting some student walkouts all around the country, including here in Rhode Island. And Alex Kithes, who recently won an election for Woonsocket City Council, ran as what I described in our conversation as openly progressive, which is fascinating because there's an interesting political dynamic in Woonsocket, conservative representation on Smith Hill, conservative representation even at the mayoral level, and of course on the council itself. Even when you look at some of the media outlets that are prominent in the area, you would get the sense that it would be an uphill battle for someone espousing quote-unquote progressive ideals. Nonetheless, running an authentic campaign, Alex Kithes was able to obtain a definitive win in a four-way race for the council. So great to sit down with Alex, understand his experience a little bit more, and also profile some of the climate activism work that he's done with the Sunrise Movement here in Rhode Island. So stick around, an interesting conversation with Woonsocket City Councilor Alex Kithes in just a moment. All right, great news. Elmwood Songwriters Club, presented by Bartholomewtown, is back, held right here at the Loft in Providence, and the next edition is Friday, October 11th at 7:30 p.m. Now, this is a free event that features a variety of Rhode Island songwriters from different backgrounds, different genres, performing short, intimate sets, again, right here at the Loft. And the best part is I'm the host. Well, that's not the best part. The best part of that, the aspect of it that's great, is that I draw the order of performers at random. So you never know who's coming next. Everyone's on their toes, and there's always a lively discussion, refreshments, all sorts of entertainment for you right here at the Loft. And by the way, there's plenty of parking. We have a gigantic lot here, no meters, none of that business. Right off the highway to Elmwood Avenue, to the Loft for Elmwood Songwriters Club. Again, the next edition, October 11th, 7:30 p.m. Now, the best way to keep up on the lineup and other details about Elmwood Songwriters Club, follow the pod on Instagram at Bartholomewtown Podcast. It's Elmwood Songwriters Club, presented by Bartholomewtown, October 11th. Remember, new episodes of the pod every Tuesday and Friday, and there's almost 130 episodes up there on ripodcast.com, bartholomewtown.com, or your preferred podcast app. All right, let's get right to it. My conversation with Woonsocket City Councilor Alex Kithes.
Last, I guess it was March of 2018, I went to an offshore drilling rally, or rather a rally against offshore drilling in Providence, and that was sort of my beginning. My first foray into climate activism, because I mean climate change had been my driving issue since high school, but it was the first time that I really actually attended a protest about it and really put my time and effort where my mouth was. So, and then from then I got involved in Climate Action Rhode Island, and so kind of spent that spring and summer being an activist, and then that summer I started campaigning for a bunch of progressive politicians. Marcia Ranglin-Vassell, Aaron Regenberg, Sam Bell, Janine Calkin, and then eventually managed a campaign that last fall for Melissa Murray, who's a senator in Woonsocket. And then the unfortunate situation, I lost my job in the winter of this past year. And so that kind of, while looking for another job and working just part-time as a waiter, it kind of freed up some time. So I really delved headfirst into as much climate activism, as much as what's going on here in Rhode Island as I could. And that meant getting involved in Sunrise, which was really, the Sunrise Rhode Island hub was becoming a burgeoning force in the state. And it was really exciting to see that. And so I trained this past February. I did their formal Sunrise 101 training, and then I was hooked. And so I started helping out wherever I could, going to lots of their actions, helping with electoral and political strategy. And yeah, and so like between that and Climate Action Rhode Island, like I feel like that is really sort of my ideological home, where these groups are fighting for a Green New Deal on every level of government, for serious climate action on the state level and in Rhode Island, and really just kind of the multi-pronged approach of creating public pressure and public education, electoral change, and legislative change. Like all of these things are really being fought for by these groups. And so, and Sunrise has just grown in by leaps and bounds over the last, 8 months, really, since since last fall.
Sir, I think since last election, decision 2018.
Yeah.
That from my vantage point, the movement's visibility, has expanded significantly.
Absolutely.
Where it's now comparable. Yesterday's rally, for example, was comparable to what you'd see from the 2A crew. As far as the Frank Psychoshes out there, the people who would back gun rights in Rhode Island, turn up, matching T-shirts, kind of an organized messaging, and then and I guess outside the reproductive, and privacy arena that we went through last year, those issues are kind of the two that seem to evoke the most passion. Now Sunrise has kind of matched that intensity, different issue, but different sides of the political spectrum. So that was kind of my takeaway, is a significant relevancy.
Yeah, and I mean, it's great because like this was the first of 4 major summits around the country, and like this is just the beginning, because there's a climate strike next Friday, and then we're like this movement is not going anywhere, and it's growing and growing, and especially in Rhode Island, we're seeing a huge growth in the number of people who really get what we're facing in the climate crisis. And so kind of to go back to your original question, because I realized I didn't really answer it.
That's all good, yeah.
So that really is what prompted me to decide to run for office when this seat opened up in Woonsocket.
Yeah.
Because I think that we can do a much better job of actually representing our people by not only addressing climate change at the scale and on the timeline demanded by the science of the crisis, but also by doing all of the things needed to solve it in a just way, by creating good paying jobs, by ensuring that racial and social justice concerns are at the forefront in the solutions that we approach, and by growing the green economy and helping municipalities and states kind of rekindle lost economic opportunity.
Yep.
And all of these things, so I see that as my fundamental place in the Woonsocket city government is kind of bringing about that change that we're going to have to bring about over the next couple of years.
Let's talk about the specifics of Woonsocket, and I imagine our audience on this episode will be, sometimes we reach a larger than Rhode Island audience on certain topics. And I imagine there's a lot of people out there who don't know the dynamics of Woonsocket. It's urban, but it's also part of the northwest portion of the state. So it's an odd political calculation. On the one hand, you have one as a progressive. On the other hand, you have representation in Smith Hill, the State House, that has conservative leaning. So talk about Woonsocket and what it took for you as an openly progressive. I mean, that sounds like but I mean, in all seriousness, running without, not playing any gimmicks, so to speak, very clear with your messaging and who you were. How did that translate in Woonsocket? What was the dynamic of that your campaign like? And then again, like what kind of are the dynamics of Woonsocket as a political arena from your standpoint?
Yeah, so a little bit of history is that Woonsocket was an industrial revolution powerhouse. It was one of the first places where that really took hold in the U.S. And the city grew by leaps and bounds as a result of that, but also as a result of awful labor conditions and really kind of exploiting people and exploiting the natural terrain, the river. and obviously all of the exploitation of resources that came into the city in order to feed the mills. And so that grew the city's economy even into the mid 20th century. And then as, outsourcing began happening and, the mills started closing, which the conditions were better by then. But as the mills started closing, the economy kind of shifted more towards commerce and retail. And that, that did well for the city for a couple of decades, really kind of into the dawn of the new millennium. And then, a variety of different situations having to do with some, former leadership in the city that really kind of stagnated the city government's growth in order to make it appear as if they should stay in power. I'm not going to name names, but and a couple of other kind of bad decisions on the state level and then also on the city level that resulted in sort of the crashing of the existing economy in the city. And so, and that was something that took place over like a decade or two, like at the end of the 20th century. And so what that's left Woonsocket with is fairly big population, 45,000 people, moderately sized urban city. With largely working class people that doesn't really have a good economic base, and there are a lot of places around the country that are like that. This model of a post-industrial mill city that really hasn't been able to maintain its growth, and so the people there and the local economy and the local government are all suffering as a result of this. And so, that is one of the defining political sort of political conditions that have led to that led on the right to Donald Trump and led on the left to the popularity of people like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren.
Populism,
exactly, because people very rightly recognize that the existing political establishment on both sides, the existing political idea of centrism and not really fighting for anything has failed them because their lived experience is that the system has failed them. And so the wild thing is that when you actually remove labels like progressive or like they called me socialist or whatever, and you talk about the policies of economic justice and cleaning the local environment and having a strong public education system and making sure that the services are there for people who need them, people agree with those things, whether or not they identify as progressives or Democrats or whatever. And that's really what our campaign was about, was these ideas, the things we need to do to improve the lives of people in the city and improve the economy and the government of the city. And so despite the fact that Woonsocket's not known as a progressive place, I would argue that when you get down to the ideas that underlie that movement, it is. In the same way that Providence is, or even a place like Warren or
Hopkinton in the past, And I guess, anywhere it's all about packaging. And if you, like you say, take away the ties to Bernie Sanders or the ties to Donald Trump in certain ideas, they resonate with people. It's all about pathways getting there, I suppose. So you must have been able to do some good, either door-to-door politicking or just really be able to catch a large portion of people who are displeased with the president, maybe leaning into Sanders like direction, or a combination thereof. How much of it was knocking on doors and convincing skeptics that what you had in mind, outside of those people who would just generally say, oh yeah, we want good public services and so forth. But people who are on a political spectrum, how difficult was it to pull people towards you? Because you had an overwhelming victory. I mean, that night, the numbers came in. It wasn't like, all right, this is a close call. I mean, you crushed that race, So how was that? You must have won over some independents and conservatives.
Yeah. So first off, the entire municipal government is nonpartisan. So we weren't running.
Sure.
Like nobody runs on a legitimate party platform. Other, certain people will put a party.
And that's like Newport as well has that same structure.
And I would argue that it's not the greatest structure, to be honest.
I don't think it's a great structure at all, because it allows for people to disguise themselves as one thing. That's why you out there openly, it was very clear if someone did any kind of research on you, whether or not you sold it to them at the door, but where you stood in world politics. And I think that's great. That you were able to do that and still win. It's authenticity.
I mean, you search my name in Google, and it's me speaking at rallies, climate rallies and stuff. So but yeah. So I mean, it definitely was, a lot of it was knocking doors and one-on-one conversations, but also just making my message and and just our campaign and what we were about, making it as public and open as possible on social media, as much radio as possible, which I would argue that talk radio in Woonsocket may not have.
So did you go on to the John DePietro show?
No, I didn't.
What's the guy, the white supremacist?
John Dion. I didn't go on his show,
didn't go on him either.
Just because his brand of if I don't even want to water down the word to call it journalism, but is not real. Like it's
performative.
It's
talk radio is definitely, there's a journalistic aspect to it. What you do, I mean, there is an element of that, but it's a performer, maybe even more than 50% of that. So you got to think that these guys, DePietro and Dion up there in Woonsocket, they're performing to a base in Woonsocket. That's why it's all that more impressive that you went out and won this council race.
Yeah.
And as a progressive, because there is definitely a very conservative base that's feeding the machine.
But it's small.
But it's small in your mind. Yeah, okay.
And that is the common knowledge amongst everybody outside of that base, is that it is a very small base. And I mean, you can look at electoral history and see that that's true, because that specifically that station WNRI has John Dion, and Larry Poitras, who was also on that station. They have spoken badly about Melissa Murray, who was on the city council for 5 years, 2 terms, for years. And she won 60% in that senatorial race as a progressive. And so I think that it indicates that that the base of people who legitimately take what is said in that talk radio station at face value is very, very small.
Right. And you'd have to think, I mean, in DePietro's case, that guy's a regional audience. He's probably generating just as many viewers on Facebook as he is on the station. So, yeah, it's fascinating stuff, but it does have its own economy. You obviously have the Woonsocket Call. You have WOON up there. What's the other newspaper?
The Valley Breeze.
Well, of course, you have the Valley Breeze, yes. And obviously, is there another Woonsocket local?
There's the Call, the Breeze, the Woonsocket Patches local online.
Sure. The Valley Breeze. I mean, we had Ethan Shorey on here. I love that newspaper.
I do too.
That's an amazing paper.
Yeah.
And Motif Magazine does a little bit of work up there. I mean, certainly getting into some of the cracks up there. But do you feel like Woonsocket, as you're advocating, there's obviously educational issues in Woonsocket. That would be a whole other podcast, which we actually should do in the future.
Definitely.
Talking about just like outside Providence education stuff. We should sit down and talk. I'll talk to you about the other players around the state. But just kind of wrapping up here, do you feel like Woonsocket gets the attention it needs as a municipality? What can you do to make pull more attention and share more of the history and the diversity of the city, and how does that tie into kind of lifting up places? You go to Ho Kong now, a restaurant like that, and it doesn't it looks just like that all those businesses look a little bit stale and ready for a facelift, if that makes sense. Not to be rude, but to be other areas in the state are getting that infrastructurally. I feel like Woonsocket can demand that.
Well, so I think that the underlying issue is that there's this whole sort of interwoven dominant political culture that you see in the maintenance of the ideas that WNRI espouses, and you see in the sort of the dynastic approach to politics that a lot of the politicians in the city take, and the fact that there is not good representation for racially, in terms of gender, in terms of LGBTQ status, in terms of a lot of things. There's not good representation in the city council, and there's this maintenance of this dominant political culture where Woonsocket is an island and we approach it in a very insular way, and we don't look to places outside of the city for ideas, for help, for good interfacing, definitely not the Providence. And so that isolationist approach has meant that despite the fact that our city is very racially diverse, obviously roughly half and half male, female, and so many other things, that it's sort of like it's this maintenance of what was believed the city was, 75 years ago, which is predominantly white, predominantly conservative. And that's not really true. That's not true. And so what that has meant is that isolationist approach has meant that Woonsocket, just as much as the state sort of ignores the northern part of the state, and specifically Woonsocket, Woonsocket doesn't, there's things we could do to change that, and we don't, because we view ourselves as an island. And I don't think that's a good approach. The people don't view it that way. The government does. And so, yeah, so I think that in terms of education funding, I believe that we could definitely improve in that regard if we, have a better relationship with the rest of the state and with the state government. In terms of, I think there's a lot of sort of ideas that I've heard floated around about how, the state could do things with sales tax or whatever to help the city, and just kind of paying more attention to the city and whether that's taking out bonds to help the city or whatever. There's a lot of things that could happen if we can foster that better relationship. And also, I think Woonsocket, by and large, is more vibrant and has more to offer than is believed by the rest of the state. And I think we just need to do a better job of marketing that. And that's one of the things that I want to be do. Do you want to talk a few minutes if you have about the specific climate work that I think we should be doing?
Absolutely. Let's just
cut, because we never. I'm so long-winded, and we never really.
Yeah, let's do that for sure.
Yeah. So I mean, because and this is something that I've gotten a lot of pushback, that climate change is not a local issue, and it's so far from the truth, because I mean assuming we are able to pass a federal Green New Deal sometime within the next few years, hopefully after the presidential election, that's still, those are going to be a set of federal mandates and federal guidelines for what needs to be done on state level and municipal level in terms of greening the economy, implementing renewable energies, creating good paying green jobs, protecting local environment, making sure that we're providing for justice and centering the people who are historically and typically marginalized. And all of those things are going to need to translate to state and municipal initiatives. And where we place renewable energy, what type of renewable energy is opportune for an area, that's all decided on the state and municipal level. And so I believe that not only because the climate crisis is here and we need to do everything we can to solve it, but also because it's ultimately going to be our work that has to be done on the municipal level to figure out what it's going to look like to decarbonize our economy. And so we should get ahead of that, and we need to do that now. And so I believe, in terms of renewable energy, I think we need to have solar on every city building. We need to do a lot more work to figure out where the opportune places for solar are in the city. And the city council, to their credit, has done that over the last couple of months. There is a project that I believe, I can't remember the numbers, but it's a pretty big project. It's 5 different locations that is being discussed right now, and I'm happy to be joining the council now as part of that. But I think, and we need to do more and more, and we need to do it with the focus of actual full decarbonization and looking at the numbers of our energy use, and obviously protecting the local environment. And this is something that you wouldn't really believe, but Woonsocket actually has a fair bit of forested area, and
definitely does, yeah,
and we need to protect that.
Quarries, right?
Yeah, but also East Woonsocket, there's a huge forested area, and I mean that does a lot in terms of lowering the city's albedo and making sure that helping to temper the effects of climate change that we know we will face no matter what.
Right.
And that's another thing where we're actually understanding what climate resiliency needs to look like is a state and municipal thing. And so I believe that this needs to be on the forefront of our conversations and in basically every decision we make about what it's going to look like to decarbonize our economy over the next few years, and what it's going to look like to adjust to the climate crisis, and what is going to happen no matter how fast we decarbonize as a world.
Exactly. Yeah. That's there's some inevitable things at this point, so it's a matter of just building that firewall. And it's time to do it.
Absolutely.
It's not like, all right, let's debate this in policy form. This is just human responsibility format at this point. So I mean, it's not even, to me, it's like one of those things like, not even a political issue.
Yeah.
And I can't, conservatives who are conservationist at heart, and progressives or Democrats or liberals, whatever, who are environmentalists at heart. I mean, it's one of those issues where the political spectrum comes right. Everyone's on the same page.
Yeah.
It's just how to get there.
Exactly. Yeah.
We got to work that out in this year, like this session.
I absolutely agree. And this on every level of government, we need to work that out. And
right.
I think
at least here in Rhode Island, they gotta start moving, because we can at least control that, as you've proven. And that's what matters right now.
Yep. And I think, and to that point, one of the important aspects of this on the municipal level is actually boots on the ground, building the movement there, and that's something that has begun as a result of our campaign. And there are a lot of people who center climate as rightfully so one of the most important issue, or the most important issue. And so, like, really figuring out how we can all work together and make sure that we're bringing in, a diverse community of people, like the actual representative community of Woonsocket, to really figure out how we can solve these problems locally, and work towards solutions on the state and national level, as people in Woonsocket who recognize the unique effects that this will have on a more impoverished community.
Right.
And
that's the other aspect of it too. Is this is not just an elite type of, great, there's a guy, nothing against him, he has every right to, but he built a wind turbine on his property, I think in North Kingstown. That's one strategy, I suppose, if you can, even in the solar market. That's certainly there are cost benefit ways to do it. I understand that, taxation wise, other programs, but realistically, the poorer you are, the harder it is to eat healthy.
Yep.
The less realistic it is to be contributing to, or the more likely it is you're going to contribute to the global warming problems that we have, climate issues that we have, environmental issues. The less time you have to have access to the information that you might need. So I think that's a big part of it, is making sure that this is not just an east side of Providence, Barrington, East Greenwich, coastal Rhode Island, pat yourself on the back type of situation, but this is right in the trenches, and it should start there. Well, it needs to develop outside of there, but it should start there in terms of implementation, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And just one side note to what you just said, though, that by and large, whether you're somebody of lower economic means in Woonsocket or higher economic means relatively in the east side of Providence, none of us are the ones who are legitimately at fault for this problem. It is by and large the fossil fuel billionaires and the wealthy corporations that contribute upwards of 70% of the contemporary carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emissions. And so that's why, and I would guess that you agree, is that's why it's not an individual changes thing. It is a structural, governmental changes that need to happen in order to prevent those wealthy fossil fuel and billionaires and executives from making decisions that sacrifice the world and the health of people of the lowest economic means, and of marginalized communities. We need to make structural changes to stop that from happening, because yes, we can turn off all the lights we want in our houses, but at the end of the day, drilling for oil and fracking and fossil fuel power plants being built in poor communities, those are the things that are causing climate change.
Absolutely. No question about it. 100% agree on that. It's, I don't know, it's like pushing the boulder up the hill. I debate sometimes with Pat Ford of the Libertarian Party, Sam Bell, a progressive. They obviously, you worked for him, and people I respect for sure. But, where I'm torn and where I just don't know, I truly don't know, is it's not even so much of a debate with these people as even Giovanni Ferrosci, a conservative. We all have the same idea, and when it comes to this to climate, change and attacking it from a corporate irresponsibility and a societal problem, and perspective. But it's just about what's the right route to get there. And I think that's the place we're at now. And so hopefully someone like you that can unite a diverse community behind it that can show, well, wait a second, this is how we do it. So
Yeah.
I'm hats off to you, and hopefully you go and Woonsocket's like all of a sudden like the green capital.
That's the goal
of New England, and then boom, the U.S. And it's
Yeah.
totally realistic. Sam Slater did it just down the Riverway a couple of years ago. Really,
Yeah, and I mean, and even more so, like if we're successful in Woonsocket this year of this first term that I have, but also like going forward, if we're successful in doing this, that can provide a model for post-industrial cities.
Yep.
All around the world, really, but I mean, like all around the United States, and especially areas in the Rust Belt where they do tend more conservative. But like seeing the economic growth and improvement in labor conditions that can result from a real green economy and a real like municipal Green New Deal, I like. That could be the beginning of a huge change, and in these areas where they're not metropolitan, and so they won't inherently have the progressive political will already built into their government to do this. But areas where there are population centers, these post-industrial urban cities, and so we have to do that. And to one of the points you just made, I think that we can all agree. So if a big corporation decided to go into a city and pollute its river, everybody, no matter their political views, would be up in arms about that.
Exactly, right.
And would be willing to use government action to stop that corporation from hurting the people in that community. And climate change is the same thing. And so and that is why I'm confident that we can have a bipartisan, quote unquote, we can have a coalition of people of many different ideologies who can ultimately say, yes, the fact that corporations, fossil fuel corporations and others, are the ones who are causing this problem and stopping us from stopping the problem. And we can make some serious structural changes to stop that from happening.
As always, thanks so much for joining in on the Bartholomewtown Podcast. I'll be back on Tuesday with a brand new episode. Until next time, I'm Bill Bartholomew. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk soon.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.